Hello everyone, I'm the Captain, and welcome to another deep dive. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey to a strange museum. A museum with no walls, no ceiling, and no guards. A museum that is orbiting in absolute silence, high above all of us. And its treasures are objects that were once symbols of humanity's peak genius. But today, we call them junk. By the end of this video, you will understand what secrets the oldest man-made object still floating in space carries with it. But before that, we must begin with a strange story. A story about a grapefruit. If you know this, I promise your view of the night sky will change forever. Imagine it's the year 1958. The world is burning in the fever of the Cold War, and the space race has reached its peak. The Soviet Union has just delivered a heavy blow to America's scientific prestige with Sputnik, the world's first satellite. America had to respond, quickly and decisively. But what was their answer? A small aluminum ball, so small that the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, mockingly compared it to a grapefruit. The name of this grapefruit was Vanguard 1. Vanguard 1 was launched into space in March of 1958 and sent radio signals back to Earth for 6 years. Then, its batteries died forever. From that day until now, for more than 67 years, this small metal ball has been silently orbiting the Earth. Vanguard 1 is the oldest man-made object still in orbit. Many call it space junk, a useless piece of trash in the endless graveyard of Earth's orbit. But, is it really? A space historian named Matt Bill has a completely different opinion. In his view, this metal grapefruit is one of the most precious objects in human history. A sacred relic from our first trembling steps into the vast ocean of space, whose place is not in Earth's orbit, but in the Smithsonian Museum, next to the Wright brothers' first airplane. He believes that by studying this 60-something-year-old time capsule, scientists could learn incredible things about the long-term effects of space on different materials. And this is where the central question of our journey takes shape. What should we do with these wandering relics in space? Are they dangerous debris that must be deorbited as soon as possible? Or are they historical treasures that we must preserve for future generations? Should we bring them back to Earth? But this is just the beginning of the story. Vanguard 1 is not alone. Up there is a complete museum of forgotten pioneers. Are you ready to meet the other members of this museum? Let's start our journey with a glorious failure. January 1959. The Soviets, drunk on the success of Sputnik, were aiming for a bigger target, the moon. They launched a spacecraft called Luna 1, a large metal sphere about the size of a yoga ball. The goal was for Luna 1 to impact the lunar surface. But the calculations were wrong. Luna 1 missed the moon by about 6,000 kilometers and continued its path into space. A failure? Perhaps at first glance, but this failure was a historic victory. Luna 1 became the first man-made object to escape Earth's gravitational prison and enter an orbit around the Sun. A small artificial planet that is still, after all these years, orbiting somewhere in the solar system. The Americans, not wanting to be left behind, sent a similar spacecraft, Pioneer 4, towards the moon. 2 months later, in March of 1959. And guess what happened? They also missed the moon by a wide margin. Pioneer 4, like its Russian rival, also became a solar orbiting satellite. But this failure wasn't useless either. On its way, Pioneer 4 sent back incredibly valuable data about Earth's radiation belts, which revolutionized our understanding of the environment surrounding our planet. These two missions were like two great explorers who set out to find an island but accidentally discovered a new continent. If you were in those engineers' shoes, how would you have felt? Defeated? Or like you had opened a new door for humanity? But let's return to Earth's orbit, where even bigger revolutions were happening. April 1960. NASA sent its first attempt at a weather satellite into space. The name they chose for it was Tiros 1. Its appearance was so strange that a television reporter compared it to a flying lady's hat box. Before Tiros, weather forecasting was more like guesswork. But this flying hatbox, for the first time, gave us eyes in the sky to see clouds and storms from above and predict their paths. Today, as we check the weather on our phones every moment, we owe everything to this strange and wonderful hatbox. 2 years later, in July of 1962, the world changed again. A satellite named Telstar was placed in orbit. Telstar was the first active communication satellite in history. For the first time, television images crossed the Atlantic Ocean live, connecting America and Europe. It was a miracle. But this miracle had a short life. Just 7 months later, Telstar went silent forever. What was the reason? A fatal miscalculation. the United States tested a nuclear bomb at high altitude, and the radiation from that explosion fried Telstar's sensitive circuits forever. We destroyed one of our greatest achievements with our own hands. Until this point, this race was only between the two great giants, America and the Soviet Union. But the world was bigger than that. In September of 1962, Canada became the third spacefaring nation with the launch of its satellite, Alouette 1. Alouette 1 was a tireless workhorse. This satellite remained active for 10 years, a record at the time, and sent back nearly 2 million images and data points from Earth's ionosphere, the layer of the atmosphere that reflects radio waves. Now let me break the pattern of the story for a moment and ask an unexpected question. At the height of the Cold War, what do you think was the scariest thing that could be placed in space? The answer was launched into space in October of 1963. A few weeks after the US ratified the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, two twin satellites named Vela were sent into a high Earth orbit. Vela, in Spanish, means to watch, and these two satellites were built for exactly that purpose, to watch. They were Earth's nuclear guardians. These two polyhedral metal objects were designed to detect any nuclear explosion in the atmosphere or in space and, through triangulation, find the exact location of the blast. They were the watchful eyes of humanity in the darkness of the Cold War, making sure no one pressed the wrong button. The space race wasn't just about science and the military. Soon, money also found its way into space. In April of 1965, a satellite named Early Bird made history. Early Bird was the first commercial communication satellite to be placed in a geostationary orbit. What does that mean? It means its rotational speed matched the Earth's, so it always remained over a fixed point on the ground. This capability, for the first time, allowed for uninterrupted live television broadcasting. All the satellite networks we watch today are descendants of this Early Bird. Meanwhile, other countries were joining the Space Club. In November of 1965, France launched its first satellite and named it Asterix, in honor of their popular comic book character. Asterix was the first satellite to be named after a cartoon character. But unfortunately, this little Gaulish warrior was damaged during launch and transmitted almost no data back to Earth. A not-so-successful start, but a start nonetheless. This museum is full of amazing stories. From Pioneer 6, which was launched in December of '65 to study solar winds and the interplanetary magnetic field to give NASA data for the moon. Missions to the Soviet Vega satellite in 1984, which was a symbol of incredible scientific cooperation at the height of the Cold War. In an epic journey, Vega flew by Venus and then passed through the gas cloud of Halley's Comet. Okay, so far, we've been immersed in the history of this museum. But what do these stories have to do with our lives today? This is where we need to build a bridge to our own world. All the satellites we've talked about have now become ghosts in Earth's orbit. More than 14,000 active and inactive satellites, plus millions of pieces of space debris, have formed a dangerous belt around our planet. Any of these could, at speeds of tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, collide with active satellites or even the International Space Station. This is a real problem. So perhaps the most logical thing to do is to bring them all back and clean up Earth's orbit. This is the same idea that Matt Bill and his colleagues are pursuing. They have presented a detailed technical plan to bring Vanguard 1 back to Earth. In their view, this is not only feasible, but could also be a show of force for space robotics companies to demonstrate their new technologies for grappling objects in space. But there is a very big but here. A space archaeologist named Alice Gorman is completely against this idea. She says these old satellites should remain where they are. In Gorman's view, they are safer in orbit, because in space, they don't belong to any specific country and are part of the common heritage of all humanity. They are archaeological sites, just like Persepolis or the pyramids of Egypt. We don't move the pyramids to preserve them in a museum. According to Gorman, we can already study them using photography and remote sensing methods without touching them. This brings us to the climax of the story and the answer to the promise from the beginning of the video. Space junk or historical treasure? The truth is, the answer to this question isn't a simple yes or no. It's a deep philosophical dilemma. On one hand, we have the desire to preserve and touch history. We love to see the first tools made by human hands in a museum. Why shouldn't our first space tools have the same fate? Bringing them back to Earth allows future generations to witness our first steps toward the stars up close. These objects can inspire millions of children to dream bigger dreams. On the other hand, do we have the right to disturb these historical sites? Space is a completely different environment. Perhaps by bringing Vanguard 1 back to Earth and placing it in air. Full of oxygen and moisture, we would inadvertently destroy it. Perhaps in situ preservation is the best way to respect this heritage. Perhaps their silence and isolation in space is part of their identity and their story. This debate forces us to ask ourselves, as a species, what legacy do we want to leave behind? Are we just makers of disposable tools that become junk after use? Or are we creators of works that will tell our story for thousands of years to come? These silent metal spheres aren't just scrap metal. They are our first handwriting on the blank, endless page of the cosmos. Our journey tonight is nearing its end. Together, we traveled to the Celestial Museum and heard the stories of metal ghosts that once carried our greatest hopes. We saw how a metal grapefruit can simultaneously be a symbol of space junk and a priceless treasure. Perhaps the next time you look up at the clear night sky, you'll remember that it's not just stars and planets up there. Up there is a museum, a graveyard, and a mirror. A mirror that reflects the amazing story of our curiosity, competition, victory, and failure. The story of our transformation from terrestrial beings into citizens of the cosmos. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves. We love you very much. And now it's your turn. Write for us in the comments. If you could bring back just one historical object from space to Earth, what would it be and why? I look forward to reading your amazing comments. Until the next journey, farewell.